The sun was a mean, merciless coin hanging in the late afternoon sky, and it beat down on the plains until even the dust seemed tired. That was when the cowboy appeared. He rode alone, as men like him usually did, saddle-worn, shoulders slouched, with the kind of weight that wasn't carried on the back but inside the bones. His horse, a rangy bay with ribs faintly visible under its hide, moved at a slow, deliberate gait, as if both rider and beast knew there was no real hurry to get wherever they were going. He came in from the west, from the direction of the empty mesas and badlands where the wind moaned through canyons and only the desperate tried to survive. His hat brim shaded his face, but not enough to hide the lines carved their lines of distance, of waiting, of watching too many sunsets without company. A rifle was slung across his saddle, and at his hip rested a revolver, worn smooth at the grip from years of handling. He looked like the kind of man who had seen trouble enough to stop running from it, but not so much that he went out of his way to find it. The town itself was little more than a scattering of wood and hope clinging stubbornly to the edge of the prairie. A single main street ran through its heart, flanked by a saloon, a sheriff's office, a general store, and a pair of boarding houses. The buildings sagged in the heat, as if they were as weary as the people inside them. Off to the edges lay small farms and homesteads, each one scratching survival from a land that gave more dust than wheat, more hardship than mercy. As the cowboy rode down the street, few looked up. Folks in towns like this learned to mind their own business, especially when a stranger rode in. But a few pairs of eyes lingered, children who peeked from behind door frames, women with laundry baskets who paused mid-step, and old men on porches who spat tobacco juice and measured the rider. In silence. Every town had its share of ghosts, and sometimes they wore skin and boots. The cowboy guided his horse toward the watering trough in front of the saloon. He dismounted slowly, boots hitting the ground with the thud of someone who had been too long in the saddle. He let the horse drink, then tied the reins loosely, trusting the animal not to wander. His movements were unhurried, but there was something deliberate in them, as though every gesture had been thought out long before it was made. When he finally stepped up onto the boardwalk, he paused at the saloon doors. The sound of a piano leaked through, off-key and lazy, mixed with the low murmur of voices. He didn't push inside. Not yet. Instead, he scanned the street again, as if making a mental note of where everyone stood, of which windows hid eyes, of where shadows pooled thickest. A man who lived by the gun always measured his surroundings, not because he expected trouble, but because trouble expected him. Somewhere down the street, a thin sheet of paper tacked to the sheriff's post caught in the wind, flapping like a wounded bird. The cowboy's gaze lingered there a moment. He couldn't read the words from this distance, but he could sense their weight. Notices pinned to posts were never good news. They were announcements of debts, hangings, or auctions. Things that marked the slow dying of hope. Still, he didn't walk toward it. Not yet. He just leaned against the post by the saloon doors, tilting his hat back, squinting against the sunlight. For a long moment, he stood there as though deciding whether he belonged inside among the whiskey and smoke, or outside where the dust and silence reigned. Either way, he carried the same loneliness with him. The saloon might soften its edge, but never erase it. He was a man who had no name in this town, and maybe no name worth speaking anywhere else. Folks might one day call him the stranger, or the drifter, or the gun hand labels made easier by the fact that he never corrected them. Men like him weren't remembered for who they were, only for what they did and whether they left trouble behind. And so, his arrival stirred a quiet ripple through the town, not enough to cause alarm, not enough to call him out, but enough that by nightfall every soul would know a new shadow had passed through their midst. They didn't know yet what role he would play in their lives, or whether he'd ride on by without leaving a trace. But the dust he carried with him clung heavy to the air, like the scent of rain before a storm. He hadn't come looking for salvation, FOR work, or even for company. He had come because the road bent this way and he had nothing better to do than follow it. That's how it always was for men like him. But the land had its own way of laying snares for wanderers. Sometimes it was gold, sometimes it was blood, and sometimes, just sometimes, it was the trembling voice of a child brave enough to stop a lonely man in his tracks. For now, though, he was only a stranger at the edge of a story not yet told. Wind picked up toward evening, carrying with it a gritty film of dust that clung to the tongue and stung the eyes. The cowboy had drifted toward the sheriff's post without much thought, though maybe it wasn't chance at all. Men who spent enough time riding alone learned to listen to the pull of things, the tilt of a sign, the uneasy stillness of a street, the way a scrap of paper flaps louder in the mind than the pounding of hooves. The notice was nailed crookedly to the wooden board outside the sheriff's office. Its edges curled in on themselves, already yellowed by the sun and brittle with "Where?" Someone had written it out in blocky black letters, bold enough that even from a few steps away the words struck hard. Public auction. All holdings of Widow Mary Carter, including homestead and effects, to be sold at noon tomorrow, by order of the sheriff to settle outstanding debts. The cowboy read it twice slow, letting the meaning sink in. He knew that name, Widow. He'd seen it attached to too many women left behind when the frontier claimed their men. Widow didn't just mean a husband buried under dirt. It meant land too poor to keep, neighbors too proud to help, and children with eyes too old for their faces. He reached up and smoothed the paper against the post, his fingertips brushing the splinters of the wood. A stray nail held it down, though the wind fought to tear it free. He thought of leaving it alone. It wasn't his concern, wasn't his fight. Tomorrow at noon, the land would pass to whoever had the silver to buy it, and the world would move. Unlike it always did still, the words clung to him the way dust clung to sweat. He pictured a woman thin, tired, maybe coughing in the night while her children tried not to listen. He pictured the men who would gather to bid, sharp-eyed cattle. Barons with too much land already, men who saw a widow's misfortune as a bargain. It was the way of things. The weak made room for the strong, and the prairie didn't shed a tear about it. A door creaked open behind him. Sheriff Barnes stepped out, leaning his weight on the jamb. He was a broad man gone soft with comfort, the kind whose badge shone brighter than his conscience. He squinted at the cowboy, measuring him with eyes that had seen strangers before and usually wished they'd kept riding. "You here for the auction?" the sheriff asked, voice flat. The cowboy let the question hang in the air before answering. "Just passing through." The sheriff nodded once, though his gaze lingered a beat too long. "Folks been talking. Widow Carter's debt's been piling. High since her husband passed. Nothing to be done but sell her out. That's the law." "Law's not always the same as right," the cowboy said, his tone mild but edged. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, tugged at his belt. "Ain't about right. It's about ledger books. And debts don't pay themselves." With that, he tipped his hat and stepped back inside, leaving the cowboy alone with the paper still rattling in the wind. For a long while, the stranger didn't move. He just stared at the poster, thinking of debts. He had his own, though. They weren't written in ink. They were etched into memory faces he couldn't forget, voices he couldn't silence, graves he couldn't unbury. Debt was a cruel word. It didn't just mean money owed. It meant duty. It meant regret. And sometimes it meant a choice that couldn't be walked away from. A child's laughter drifted faintly from down the street. The cowboy turned his head and saw a girl chasing a ragged doll, her bare feet kicking up dust. She looked no older than 7, with long hair tangled from the wind and cheeks smudged with dirt. She paused in her play just long enough to glance at him one quick, curious look, and then she hurried on, her doll trailing behind like a wounded soldier. He followed her with his eyes until she slipped around the corner and something in his chest tightened. Children had a way of looking at you without looking, of seeing things you didn't know you carried. The poster flapped again, as though calling for him to make sense of it. He reached up and tugged the nail free, folding the notice carefully, before sliding it into his coat pocket. It wasn't his problem, not yet. But the weight of the paper rested heavy against his ribs. Like a coin of fate he hadn't asked to carry. By sundown, the saloon lamps were lit and music spilled into the street. Men drank, laughed, and forgot the world outside their whiskey glass. But the cowboy sat alone at a corner table, the folded poster beside his drink, untouched. He didn't look at it, didn't need to. He could already hear the widow's silence, already see the shadows under her roof. Tomorrow, at noon, the hammer would fall and she'd lose everything. Unless, somehow, somebody stopped it. And though he told himself a dozen times it wasn't his business, the thought gnawed at him until the night grew heavy with it. The auction wasn't until tomorrow, but already it had claimed him. The saloon was half full when the cowboy finally stepped inside. Smoke hung in the air like a worn-out curtain, heavy with the smell of cheap tobacco and spilled whiskey. A piano clinked somewhere near the back, the tune stumbling more than it. Danced while men hunched over tables, their voices low and edged with laughter that didn't quite reach their eyes. The cowboy ordered nothing, not yet. He sat in the shadow of the corner, back to the wall, hat tilted low. From there he could see everything, the batwing doors swinging open, the bar lined with rough hands gripping glass, the card game that seemed friendly until someone lost too much. He had no business in the room, and yet it felt easier to be among strangers than to be alone with a folded paper burning a hole in his coat. It wasn't until he stepped outside again, after the lamps were lit and the street turned gold under their glow, that he noticed her. She was sitting on the edge of the boardwalk across the street, her legs dangling over the dust. In her lap rested a doll, more rags than cloth, with one button eye missing and hair made from unraveling thread. The girl stroked its head as though it were alive, whispering to it words the cowboy couldn't hear. When she looked up, her eyes caught his, and for a moment he almost turned away. He had seen too many looks like that before. Children who knew more of loss than laughter. Her gaze was steady, not shy, though he could see the tremor in the way she held her doll tighter. The cowboy crossed the street slow, his spurs clicking softly against the boards. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to startle her. "Evening," he said, his voice low, meant to sound gentler than it usually did. The girl blinked, then nodded once. "Evening, mister." There was a pause, the kind of silence that tests a man's patience. Finally, the cowboy tilted his head at the doll. "That your partner there?" Her fingers brushed the doll's frayed dress. "Her name's Annie. She don't say much, just listens." "Good trait," he said. The girl studied him a moment longer. Then, with surprising suddenness, she asked, "You gonna be at the auction tomorrow?" The question landed sharper than a thrown knife. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crouched so his eyes were nearer hers, though he kept his hat brim low. "Why'd you ask?" Her voice wavered, but she steadied it with something braver than most grown men managed. "'Cause they're gonna sell my mama. I swear I won't cry, just don't let them sell my mama." The words cut clean through the night. He felt them strike a place inside him that had been closed off for years, a place he'd locked away with other memories best forgotten. "They're not selling your mama," he said, careful, though even. As he spoke, the poster in his coat burned like truth against his chest. "They are." The girl hugged the doll close. "They said it at the store and at the church, too. If she can't pay, they'll take everything. Mr. Harlan's gonna bid. He's always wanted our land." Her small chin lifted stubbornly. "That's the same as selling my mama." Where'll we go if we don't have home? The cowboy had no answer. He thought of the widow Mary Carter, the name printed bold on the notice, and wondered if she was lying awake right now, listening to her daughter fret and trying not to let her own voice break. He thought of the cattle baron Harlan, a man he hadn't met but already knew too well, greedy eyes, hands soft from letting others do his work, the kind who believed the world owed him everything. The girl must have seen something flicker across his face because her tone softened. You look like somebody who don't scare easy. That almost drew a laugh from him, though it came out more as a sigh. Sometimes that's not a blessing, little one. She hugged her doll tighter. You'll help, won't you? He should have said no. Should have told her he was just a drifter, a man with no ties to this town, no right to meddle in its troubles. But the way she asked, like she already believed he could, like she was too tired to believe in much else, tangled his tongue. Finally he stood, pulling his hat lower over his eyes. Get on home. Look after your mama tonight. Tomorrow's a long day. She didn't smile, didn't thank him. She just nodded solemnly, like a soldier acknowledging orders, then slipped off the boardwalk and disappeared down the darkened road, doll tucked safe under her arm. The cowboy stood a while longer, staring after her until the shadow swallowed her small figure whole. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out the folded notice. Under the lamplight, the words looked even crueler than they had before. Public auction. Widow Carter. Noon tomorrow. The girl's voice lingered in his ears. I swear I won't cry, just don't let them sell my mama. And though he told himself again that it wasn't his fight, the truth was already settled deep in his bones. It was his fight now, whether he wanted it or not. The night settled thick over the town, stars spread thin across a black sky. The cowboy didn't go back to the saloon. Instead, he walked the dirt street slow, letting his boots sink into the ruts carved by wagons. His horse nickered softly from where it was tied, but he didn't mount up. Something tugged him forward toward the edge of town, where lantern light gave way to open dark. That was where he found her again. The girl sat on the steps of a weather-beaten house that leaned tiredly against the night. Her doll rested in her lap, but she wasn't playing now. Her small frame was rigid, her gaze fixed on nothing. A single lamp burned weakly in the window behind her, its light too dim to hide the wear in the boards. The sag of the roof, the hunger of a home stretched past its breaking point. She looked up as he approached. No fear, just expectation, as though she had known he would come. You followed me, she said simply. Didn't mean to, he answered, though they both knew it wasn't true. He stayed on the dirt, not stepping onto the porch, but close enough that her voice didn't have to rise above a whisper. She set the doll aside carefully, smoothing its rags like a mother tucking in a child. My mama's inside, she said. She's sleeping. Some days she don't wake up till late. Some days she can't even stand. The cowboy tipped his hat lower. I'm sorry to hear that. She don't like me worrying, the girl went on, so I don't tell her everything I hear, but I hear plenty. At the store, at the church, even at school, though I don't go much now. They all say it's settled. Tomorrow Mr. Harlan will get the farm. Her words quickened, each one sharper, like she was trying to empty a burden too heavy for her shoulders. If he takes it, we got nowhere. Mama can't travel. She can barely breathe. And me, she cut herself off, clutching the doll again. Hugging it to her chest. The cowboy waited, his jaw tightening, but his voice calm. And you? Her eyes found his, wide but steady. And me, I can't let them sell my mama. I swear I won't cry. Just don't let them. There it was again, the same words she'd spoken before, but heavier now, as if she'd unwrapped their full weight and laid them in his hands. She didn't plead the way grown folks did, with bargaining and flattery. Her plea was plain like stone, raw, honest, And unshakable. The cowboy shifted, suddenly aware of the silence pressing close. He had heard plenty of desperate voices in his life, beggars, drunks, men on their knees in the dirt with a gun pointed at them. But this one, the small, certain voice of a child, was different. It didn't beg for mercy. It asked for justice, and it asked it of him. "You think I can stop it?" he asked finally. "I know you can." Her answer came quick, unhesitant, as though she'd already decided it. The certainty in her tone struck deeper than the plea itself. He almost wished she'd begged, for then he could have refused and walked away. But to be believed in, that was a harder thing to turn his back on. His hand drifted to the inside of his coat where the folded auction notice rested. He could feel its crinkle under his fingertips, like it was waiting for him to decide. Little. "One," he said, his voice rough, "I don't belong here. This ain't my fight. I've seen enough to know when to step aside." But even as he said it, he remembered a different face, smaller, softer, lost long ago. He remembered promises he hadn't kept, graves he hadn't protected, tears that had fallen no matter what words were spoken. The girl leaned forward, her eyes fierce in the lamplight. "Then don't do it for us. Do it 'cause you can. You're the only one who can." For a long moment he couldn't speak. His throat felt dry, his chest heavy. Finally he said, "Go on inside. Watch over your mama. Let me think on it." She hesitated, then nodded, though disappointment flickered in her gaze. She picked up her doll and carried it inside, the door creaking shut behind her. The cowboy stood there a long while, staring at the darkened house, the single lamp flickering in the window. He told himself he would ride out come dawn, leave the auction, the widow, and the girl behind. But the words she had spoken, "I swear I won't cry. Just don't let them sell my mama," lodged in him like a thorn. And some thorns, once buried, never worked their way out. The cowboy slept little that night. He made camp just outside the town, far enough from the lamplight to feel alone, close enough to hear the faint sounds of laughter and piano drifting across the dark. His horse grazed nearby, tail swishing. Lazily, while he lay stretched against his saddle with a blanket pulled over him. But sleep didn't come. Not real sleep. Just broken pieces of it, scattered between memories. He thought about the girl's voice. How steady it had been when she said the words, "I swear I won't cry, just don't let them sell my mama." He thought about her mother, whom he hadn't yet seen, sick and fading inside that leaning farmhouse. And he thought about the poster, its cruel letters still folded in his coat. Every time he closed his eyes, other faces pushed forward. A woman's smile, one he hadn't seen in more than a decade. A boy's laughter, sharp, wild, cut short too soon. A cabin on fire, orange glow against black sky, and him arriving too late, always too late. He rolled over, swore under his breath, and stared up at the stars. It wasn't his fight. That was the truth of it. He was a drifter, a man who belonged nowhere and to no one. If he tied himself to every widow, every orphan, every cruel baron trying to steal land, he'd be buried. A dozen times over. Better to keep moving. That was what the trail taught. Keep moving, and trouble falls behind. And yet, the girl's certainty had cut through his excuses like a blade. "You're the only one who can," she'd said. She hadn't asked if he would. She had told him he would. Like it was already written, he pulled the poster from his coat and unfolded it. In the moonlight, the ink looked blacker, meaner. Widow Mary Carter, noon. Auction, sheriff's order. He traced the words with his thumb, then crushed the paper into a ball and tossed it into the dying fire. The edges curled, flared, and turned to ash. But the words didn't leave his mind. By dawn he was on his feet, coffee boiling black and bitter in a tin cup. He drank it slow, staring at the horizon. The prairie stretched endless in both directions. He could take the northern trail, ride away before noon, never hear another word about the widow or her daughter. By nightfall he'd be 20 miles gone, and by next week he'd forget the girl's eyes. But he knew better. He'd been carrying ghosts long enough to recognize the weight of a new one settling on his shoulders. If he left now, if he let the widow be sold off, he'd remember the girl's voice forever. He saddled his horse, but his hands moved slower than usual. He strapped the rifle across the saddle horn, checked the revolver at his hip, tightened the cinch strap until the horse shifted under him. He worked with the care of a man preparing not just for a ride, but for a reckoning dot. As he swung into the saddle, he found himself speaking low, almost to the horse. "Ain't our fight," he muttered. "But damned if it don't feel like it. Ought to be." The bay flicked its ears back, as though in answer. The cowboy guided the animal toward town, but instead of heading straight for the saloon or the sheriff's office, he circled wide. He wanted to see the land, her land. The Carter homestead sat a mile outside town, fenced in by wood that had long since warped and grayed. A single field stretched behind it, more weeds than wheat, though he could see where someone had fought stubbornly to till the soil. The house sagged but still stood, and in the early light, smoke curled weakly from the chimney. He sat his horse at the edge of the property, watching. The girl stepped out, carrying a bucket almost as big as she was. She set it down hard by the pump, braced her thin arms, and pulled until the handle squealed. The water came slow, a trickle at first, then a splash. She filled the bucket, strained to lift it, and carried it back toward the house. She didn't look up, didn't notice him there. But watching her struggle against the weight, stubbornly refusing to quit, the cowboy felt the knot inside him tighten. This wasn't just about debts. This was about survival, about a girl fighting battles too big for her and a mother too sick to help. About men like Harlan who circled like buzzards, waiting for the weak to fall. He exhaled, long and heavy, then turned his horse back toward town. If he stayed out of it, the girl would learn what most children on the frontier learned. The world doesn't care. Mercy is a luxury. And sometimes the law does worse harm than lawlessness. But if he stepped in, if he set himself against Harlan and the sheriff, he'd be inviting the very trouble he'd spent his life trying to outrun. Still, as he rode, he knew the decision had already been made. Men like him didn't find redemption often. Maybe he wasn't looking for it. But sometimes, when the past left nothing but ashes, the only thing left was to keep one promise that mattered, even if it wasn't his own. The sheriff's office sat squat and square on the corner of Main Street, its porch shaded by a low awning that had seen too many seasons of wind. A jail cell clanged somewhere in the back, though the place was quiet, otherwise too quiet for a town where men drank hard and quarreled harder. The cowboy hitched his horse. Outside, the bay snorting as though it too felt the weight of what was coming. He stepped onto the porch, boots creaking against the boards, and pushed through the door without knocking. Sheriff Barnes looked up from behind his desk. He was spooning sugar into a mug of coffee, his guts spilling against the edge of the table, his badge gleaming in the lamplight. Behind him, the wall was plastered with wanted posters, most yellowed with age, as if the men on them had either died long ago or ridden too far to matter. "Well," the sheriff said, setting his spoon aside, "if it ain't our drifter. You've been sniffing around since yesterday. What's your business here?" The cowboy leaned against the doorframe, hat brim shadowing his eyes. "Read your notice. The auction." The sheriff grunted, sipping his coffee. "Tomorrow at noon. Nothing unusual. Happens all the time when debts stack higher than crops." "Widow Carter," the cowboy said, his tone steady. "She sick?" The sheriff's jaw tightened, though his voice stayed even. "Ain't my concern how healthy she is. My concern's the law. And the law says if you can't pay, you lose. Simple." The cowboy let the silence stretch. Then softly, "Simple for who?" That earned him a sharper look. Barnes set down his cup and leaned back, chair groaning under his weight. "Let me spell it plain. Widow Carter owes money. Mr. Harlan's been waiting for this. He's the only one in town with pockets deep enough to cover the debts. And once the hammer falls, that land's his. That's how it works. And if it don't work that way tomorrow?" the cowboy asked. The sheriff studied him long and hard. The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening between them. "You thinking of meddling?" The cowboy didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than words. The sheriff sighed and rubbed at his temple. "Look, I don't know what you're carrying around, and I don't rightly care. But I've seen men like you before wandering through, looking for something to set right. Usually ends with blood on the ground and a grave on the hill. And I don't fancy digging another hole in this town." The cowboy straightened from the doorframe, his hand resting loosely near his hip. "Maybe some holes need digging." Barnes' face hardened. "You don't know Harlan. He ain't just some rancher. He's got half this county in his pocket, and the other half too scared to spit without his say-so. He don't just buy land, he buys men. And those men do his work." "Sounds like you're one of them," the cowboy said quietly. The sheriff bristled, color rising in his cheeks. "Watch yourself. Badge or no badge, I don't take kindly to insults." "I ain't insultin'," the cowboy replied, "just readin' the truth." For a long moment, neither man moved. Then the sheriff leaned forward, voice dropping low, the kind of tone meant to warn rather than threaten. "Listen to me. If you've got sense, you'll ride out before noon. Don't matter how fast your gun is. Harlan's got numbers. He don't. Fight fair. He don't fight alone. And he won't stop once you've crossed him." The cowboy turned toward the door, pausing only long enough to say, "Maybe that's why someone ought to stand in his way." He stepped outside before the sheriff could answer, the door banging shut behind him. On the porch, the morning light seemed brighter, harsher. The town was stirring, merchants opening shop, children darting through the street, women sweeping dust from porches that would be covered again before noon. Life went on, oblivious to the storm brewing in its center. The cowboy mounted his horse, pulling the reins tight. He could feel eyes on him from every direction, curious, wary, measuring. Word traveled fast in places like this. By now, folks would already be whispering that the stranger was asking questions about the Carter widow, that he'd stood toe-to-toe with Sheriff Barnes and hadn't blinked. He nudged the bay forward, heading out of town toward the open road. But he wasn't leaving, not yet. He rode until the last buildings fell behind, then stopped on a rise overlooking the Carter homestead. From here, he could see the girl hanging laundry on a line that sagged low, her small arms barely reaching high enough to clip the clothespins. The fabric fluttered weakly in the wind, thin and worn. Behind her, smoke drifted from the chimney, carrying with it the faint smell of broth too watered down to fill any belly. The sheriff's warning echoed in his ears. Ride out before noon. Don't matter how fast your gun is. Maybe the man was right. Maybe this was one fight too many. But then the girl turned, just slightly, as though she felt someone watching from afar. She raised her hand, small and sure, and waved once toward the horizon. The cowboy touched the brim of his hat in return. The sheriff's warning didn't matter anymore. The prairie cooled fast once the sun slipped behind the horizon. Heat bled out of the ground, and the air carried a crisp bite that warned of autumn's approach. The cowboy guided his horse off the trail toward the low ridge overlooking the Carter homestead. From here, he could watch without being seen, a habit born of too many nights in hostile country. The house was quiet, its roof sagging under years of weather, boards gray and split. A single lantern glowed faintly behind the front window, its light soft as a heartbeat. The fields beyond were mostly barren patches of stubbled wheat, a row of beans gone to seed, and fences that leaned like drunks too tired to stand straight. The land had given up long before the family who clung to it. He dismounted and let the bay graze in the tall grass. Then he settled himself on the slope, rifle across his knees, and watched. After a time, the girl stepped out. She carried a bucket, too heavy for her small arms, and set it down with a thump before sinking onto the porch beside it. Her doll lay across her lap again, limp but carefully cradled. She rocked it as though it were a real baby, whispering words meant for no one. Els thought the cowboy couldn't hear her, but he didn't need to. He knew the sound of a child comforting herself against silence. A shadow moved behind the curtain inside her mother. Thin, bent, barely a shape in the lamplight. The figure raised a hand, maybe to cough, maybe to push hair from her face. Then she sank back into the chair as if even that small act had stolen her strength. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He'd seen sickness hollow out too many souls. On the frontier, there was no mercy for the weak, no doctors to bring miracles, no neighbors willing to carry another's load for long. Folks looked after their own, and when they couldn't, the world swallowed them whole. The girl rose after a while, hauling the bucket inside with both arms straining. The door shut softly, and the house went still again. The cowboy stayed where he was, staring at the dim glow of the lantern. His thoughts drifted backward, unbidden, to another night long ago. A cabin in the mountains, snow piled high outside. His wife dark-haired, gentle rocking their own child by the fire. A boy with curious eyes, barely old enough to walk, laughing as he tugged on his father's boots. He had left them for a few days' ride, chasing work that might pay off their debts. When he came back, the cabin was ash. The neighbors muttered about raiders. The law offered nothing. And by the time he buried what little he could gather, he had already buried himself. He dragged a hand across his face, trying to chase the memory back where it belonged. But the girl's voice from earlier wouldn't let him. "I swear I won't. Pride just don't let them sell my mama." That wasn't a plea anymore. That was an echo, bouncing through his bones. He shifted, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Not this time," he murmured, the words slipping out before he could stop them. His voice was rough, cracked with the weight of old oaths. Broken and new ones forming. The stars above glittered cold, indifferent. But down below, the lantern in the Carter home burned on. Faint, but steady. The cowboy stayed until long after the light went out. He listened to the prairie, to the coyotes calling in the distance, to the steady cropping of his horse's teeth on grass. And through it all, he felt the decision settling heavier in him like a stone dropped into deep water. He could leave. He could vanish before dawn, just another shadow passing through. No one would blame him. No one would even remember his name, but he knew himself well enough to see the truth. If he rode away, the girl's eyes would follow him, her words gnawing at him every mile. And someday, when his bones grew too tired to carry him further, would still hear her voice in the silence. "Don't let them sell my mama." He could not outrun that. So he sat there on the ridge, the prairie stretching wide and endless around him, and gave his silence to the night. It was not a prayer. He'd forgotten how to pray. It was not even a vow spoken aloud. It was simply a promise made in the marrow that come noon tomorrow, he would stand between that family and the men who meant to strip them bare. He didn't know how, not yet. He had no silver to outbid Harlan, no allies in the town, no reason other than a voice that refused to let him be. But he would stand all the same, for the girl, for her mother, and maybe, if he admitted it to himself, for the boy he once lost. Wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from the chimney. He pulled his blanket tighter, settled against his saddle, and kept watch as the night deepened. By the time the first light of dawn brushed the horizon, the cowboy's decision was made. He hadn't spoken it. He didn't need to dot it was a silent promise, etched deeper than words. By late morning the town had gathered, drawn as much by curiosity as by duty. Auctions weren't rare on the frontier land, and belongings changed hands all the time, but there was always something hungry in the way folks came to watch. Maybe it was the lure of bargains, maybe it was the comfort of seeing someone else lose what they still held on to. The Carter homestead was too far out, so the sheriff staged the auction on Main Street in front of his office. The widow herself was nowhere to be seen, too sick. The whisper said to leave her bed. That absence only sharpened the spectacle. All that stood for her was her daughter, the girl with the ragged doll clutched tight in her arms. She stood small and straight-backed by the sheriff's post, her hair tangled by the wind, her jaw set with a stubbornness beyond her years. The cowboy kept to the edge of the crowd, hat brim low, shoulders easy. He looked for all the world like another drifter come to see what scraps might be had. But his eyes were sharp, scanning every face, every gesture, every hand resting too close to a holster. Sheriff Barnes mounted the steps of the porch and raised his voice. By order of this office, to settle outstanding debts, the holdings of Widow Mary Carter Homestead, stock and effects shall be sold to the highest bidder. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Men shuffled forward, coins jingling in their pockets. And then came Harlan. He arrived not on foot but in a polished carriage drawn by two glossy bays. The man himself was broad and well-fed, with a mustache, waxed to points, and a coat too fine for dust roads. Two hired guns trailed him, big men with blank eyes and hands never straying far from their belts. Harlan dismounted slow, letting everyone see the silver watch chain across his vest, the glint of his rings. He didn't look at the sheriff, didn't look at the crowd. His gaze went straight to the girl and the smirk that spread across his face soured the air. "Shame your mama couldn't come," he drawled, loud enough for all to hear. "But I'll take good care of the place. Make something proper out of it." The girl hugged her doll tighter, her lips pressed white. She didn't answer him. The sheriff cleared his throat. "We'll begin the bidding at $50. Harlan raised his hand immediately. 50. No hesitation, no pause. He wanted to clear the land was already his. "Do I hear 60? The sheriff called, though his voice lacked conviction. Silence. No one else dared speak. Farmers shifted uneasily, but none had the money or the stomach to stand against Harlan. 60? Barnes tried again. Harlan lifted his hand lazily. 70? The crowd muttered. A few men glanced at one another, but still no one moved. Girl's eyes darted, searching the faces around her. Hope flared briefly, then dimmed. Her hands tightened on the doll until her knuckles shone. The cowboy felt the weight of her gaze even though she didn't find him. He shifted his stance, rolling one shoulder, forcing calm into his breath. He had told himself he'd wait, measure the moment, but already the noose was tightening. 100. Harlan said, before the sheriff could even call the next number. His voice dripped with triumph. "Let's not drag it out." The sheriff swallowed. "Do I hear?" The cowboy stepped forward. 200. The words cut the air clean. Head snapped toward him. The sheriff blinked, startled. Even Harlan froze, his smirk faltering. The cowboy stood easy, one hand resting near his belt, the other hooked in his coat pocket. His voice had been calm, but it carried. The crowd leaned closer, hungry for the fight they sensed. Harlan's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be, stranger?" The cowboy tipped his hat back, just enough for the light to catch his face. "Nobody. Just someone who don't like vultures circling the livin'." A murmur surged through the onlookers. The girl's head snapped up, her eyes locking on him, wide and fierce. Harlan's smirk returned, colder now. "You got coin to back that mouth? 200 ain't small change." The cowboy's lips twitched not quite a smile. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. But I reckon you won't like what happens if you press the matter." The crowd hushed, every ear straining. The tension coiled tighter, the sheriff's hand twitching at his side as though he wished to end it but didn't dare. The girl's whisper reached him then, carried only to his ears. "I swear I won't cry, just don't let them sell my mama." And the cowboy knew. Noon had come, and the promise was no longer silent. For a long moment, the town square held its breath. The only sound was the creak of the sheriff's chair as he shifted uneasily on the porch, caught between his badge and his fear. Dust swirled in the noonlight, drifting across the boots of men who had been waiting all morning for something just like this. Sparked out the cowboy's bid hung in the air like gun smoke. He hadn't drawn, hadn't moved much at all, but already the crowd felt the ground shift. Harlan's smile tightened into something thinner, sharper. He waved a hand as though brushing away a fly. "You don't belong here, stranger. This is business, not charity." The cowboy's gaze stayed steady. "I ain't offering charity. I'm offering 200. You got the money?" Harlan snapped, his voice turning hard. The cowboy didn't flinch. "I got enough." It wasn't an answer, not really, and both men knew it. But the way he said it calm, certain planted doubt where numbers should have been. The sheriff cleared his throat, voice cracking. "Bidding stands at 200. Do I hear 250? The crowd shifted. A few men glanced at one another, wondering if maybe the stranger meant to stake real coin. If he did, it could change everything. Harlan barked a laugh too loud, too forced. 300. He said it quick, slamming the number down like a hammer. His eyes darted around. Daring anyone else to speak out, the cowboy didn't hesitate. 4. The muttering rose like a tide. No one in town had ever seen Harlan challenged, much less outbid. Harlan's face darkened. His men moved closer, their hands hovering above their holsters. The girl clutched her doll tighter, her eyes locked on the cowboy as if her will alone could hold him steady. "Enough of this farce," Harlan growled, his voice dropping low and dangerous. "Sheriff, you gonna let a drifter waste our time? Man's bluffing. He ain't got nothing." Barnes licked his lips, sweat beading. Under his hat. "It's a free auction, Harlan. Can't shut him out unless he folds." The cowboy stepped forward, closing the space between him and the porch. His boots sounded deliberate against the boards. "You want proof I got coin?" He reached into his coat slowly, slow enough that no trigger twitched, and drew out small leather pouch. He tossed it onto the steps with a dull clink of silver inside. The sheriff's eyebrows rose. The crowd leaned closer. Harlan sneered. "That ain't near enough for what you're shouting." "Maybe not," the cowboy said evenly. "But I ain't here to buy land. I'm here to keep you from tacking it." The words dropped like a stone in a still pond. The sheriff went pale. The crowd murmured louder, the sound of men sensing blood. Harlan's smirk finally cracked, revealing the ugliness beneath. He took a slow step forward, his boots gleaming too clean for the dust of Main Street. "You think you can stand between me and what's mine?" The cowboy's hand hovered just near his holster. Not resting, not reaching, just close enough to remind everyone that the real bidding was about to begin. "It ain't yours yet," he said, "and maybe it never will be." The silence that followed was sharp, brittle. Everyone knew the line had been crossed. This was no longer about money or land or debt. It was about pride, and pride was blood's quickest fuel. Harlan's eyes flicked to his men. "Teach him what happens to fools who don't know their place." One of the hired guns reached first, leather creaking as his hand closed around the grip. But he never cleared leather. The cowboy's revolver flashed in the sun, drawn in a blur that ended with steel aimed steady at the man's chest. The hammer clicked back, cold and final. The crowd gasped. The girl's breath caught audibly in. "The hush. Don't," the cowboy said softly, almost gently. "Not today." The second hired gun froze, his hand half raised. The first stood stiff, eyes locked on the barrel aimed at his heart. Harlan's face purpled with rage, his hand twitching toward his own sidearm, but he stopped, reading something in the cowboy's eyes. Something that said this was no bluff, no passing threat. The sheriff rose to his feet, voice shaking. "That's enough. By God, this is a public auction, not a brawl." "No," the cowboy cut him off, his gaze never leaving Harlan. "This is a robbery, and I won't stand by watching it happen." The crowd erupted then, not with gunfire, not yet, but with voices. Farmers and townsfolk who'd been silent all morning now muttered louder. Emboldened by the sight of someone standing up, Harlan looked around and saw, for the first time in years, eyes not dropping from his glare. The cowboy's voice stayed. Calm, measured. "You want this land, Harlan? You're gonna have to take it by more than coin. And if you do—" He shifted his revolver just slightly, the sunlight catching along its barrel. "You'll answer to me." The girl's whisper. Carried again, only for him. "Don't let them sell my mama." And the cowboy, still steady as stone, gave the smallest nod. The auction was broken. The fight was coming. The street was still. No wind, no bird, no clatter of hooves. Only breath and heartbeat and the faint creak of leather as men shifted their weight. Waiting. The cowboy's revolver was steady, its barrel a line drawn through. The noonlight aimed square at Harlan's hired gun. Not a quiver, not a shake. He looked like a man born holding iron. Harlan licked his lips. His smile was gone now, stripped away, leaving only the raw, ugly hunger underneath. "You've got one chance, stranger. Put that iron away, mount your horse, and ride out. Do it, and I might forget you ever opened your mouth." The cowboy's gaze didn't move. "Ain't ridden out. Not till this family's safe." The girl stood at the edge of the porch, her doll pressed against her chest, eyes wide but unblinking. She looked at the cowboy the way drowning folk looked at rope, fearful, desperate, but clinging anyway. Harlan's jaw clenched. His voice dropped, cold as a rattler's hiss. "Then you're a dead man." The first hired gun twitched, trying to outdraw death. The cowboy's revolver barked once, loud and sharp as thunder. The man staggered, clutching his chest, and went down hard in the dust. The second drew faster than most, but not faster than the cowboy. A second shot cracked, clean and sure. The gunman spun, his revolver clattering uselessly on the boards before he crumpled. The crowd scattered back, men dragging women and children with them, boots pounding across the street as panic swelled. But beneath it all was a rising murmur, not just fear, but awe. Only Harlan remained in place, his face white beneath the mustache. His hand shook as it hovered above his pearl-handled pistol. He had hired others to do his killing for years, and now they lay bleeding in the dirt. The cowboy turned his revolver toward him, steady as before. "Don't," he said softly. Harlan's lip curled. Pride warred with terror in his eyes. "You think you can stop me? You think the law'll side with you?" The sheriff, sweating pale on the porch, finally found his voice. "Law don't side with murderers, Harlan. Not after what we just saw." His words shook, but they were words the vads the whole crowd had been waiting for. Harlan's hand twitched, and that was all. The cowboy fired. The shot struck Harlan's pistol clean, shattering its grip, sending it clattering to the boards. Harlan yelped, clutching his bleeding hand, his bravado gone in an instant. He fell to his knees, cursing, whining, his fine coat stained with dust and blood. The crowd surged forward, now not to fight, but to surround, to bear witness. Men who had kept silent under Harlan's thumb for years now spat his name like a curse. The sheriff bent to pick up the broken pistol. holding it high for all to see. "This auction's over," the cowboy said, holstering his revolver slow and deliberate. His voice carried, calm and hard as stone. "This land stays with the widow. Carter, any man thinks different, he'll have to answer me." No one spoke against him. The silence that followed was not fear, but agreement. For the first time in years, Harlan had been broken and the town had seen it. The girl stepped forward, past the sheriff, past the muttering men. She stopped in front of the cowboy, her doll hanging limp at her side. Her eyes were wide, shining, with something that wasn't quite tears, not yet. "You didn't let them sell my mama," she whispered. The cowboy tipped his hat, his jaw tightening. "No, little one, I didn't." For a moment, the square was just the two of them, the child who had asked, the drifter who had answered. Around them, the crowd murmured. The sheriff barked orders, and Harlan was hauled away, still cursing. But between them, it was quiet. The girl hugged her doll close, and for the first time, her shoulders sagged with relief. She hadn't cried, not when she pleaded, not when the guns fired. She had kept her word. The cowboy, though he turned away quick, before anyone could see the wet shine in his eyes, he walked to his horse, mounted up slow, and tugged his hat low. The girl called after him, but softly, as if she already knew. He wouldn't stay. He didn't look back. A man like him was a shadow needed in the moment, gone in the next. But as he rode out, the girl's words followed him, a tether in the wind. "I swear I won't cry, just don't let them sell my mama," and though he left the town behind, he carried those words like a brand on his heart. Some promises, once made, never let a man go.